Morning all, let's have a look at the round 10 games played on the 27th, which is yesterday, 27th of March 2013. So let's start by looking at Magnus Carlsen against Boris Gelfand. So Magnus kicked off with e4, and it seemed Boris Gelfand wanted to repeat the game against Rajbov that Magnus was doing quite badly in out of the opening. Well, kind of drifted into a passive position. So it was this Rosalimer anti-Sveshnikov system, bishop b5, and now this e6, which Rajbov had played against Magnus. So would we see something different after castles, knight e7? Well, Magnus has already actually done something different. He hasn't immediately just doubled the pawns. So by castling, it's a different strategy. The bishop can still take on c6, but quite often it will do something else, like return back to f1, or it might even potentially go like this, but often returning to f1 I think is one of the more popular ideas. So knight e7, rook e1, giving the bishop space to go back if it's going to be kicked, and it does. So a6, bishop f1. So this is quite a topical line actually recently. D5 from Boris, which does take some risk in the centre a little bit, potentially. Okay, after e takes d5, knight takes d5, d4. Now, very careful move here, because black has to be wary about walking into c4 and d5. So knight f6, keeping the pressure on d4. So he could answer something like c4 with c takes d now. Anyway, there's a question asked as well about d4 immediately. So what does white want to do about this d4 pawn? Well, it's protected with bishop e3. And actually, after c takes d4, knight takes d4, look at the pawn structure. We've got a 3-2 pawn majority. And long-term prospects, I was asked about this on Chessbomb. What do I think? I just mentioned this when I briefly just got to this position, that this could be a long-term goal to try and use the pawn majority in some way. Okay, but black has a a classic solid position. White might want to use the e5 point later as well, because that's a semi-open file. Okay, let's see, bishop d7, and we see c4. So this knight doesn't want to block in the c pawn. That could be a useful pawn anyway for holding up the d5 square here, and b5 breaks. Black now takes on d4, bishop takes d4, bishop c6. It seems very solid and playable position. Knight c3 for both sides, so bishop e7. Now a3, I think Magnus is keen to try and get the space going with these pawns as well, and cut out squares like a5 for the queen. So in fact, black though prevents white playing b4 by playing a5. It doesn't matter about the slight loosening of b5 here in this particular position. And anyway, the a5 square is taken away from the queen, so Magnus is not probably too disappointed that there's no queen a5 resource anymore. Queen d3 is played, and this has some majestic motions plotted like queen g3 if rook d1 first to support d4. We have a kind of towel-like attacking position being built up with the bishops potentially both staring, and maybe the queen going here at some point. Bishops potentially later both staring at the king. So it seems a little bit scary that there's a very comfortable attacking setup on the cards here with queen g3. And there's also tactical possibilities to consider, like knight d5 at various points here. Okay, so we see queen c7, which takes away this queen g3 resource. Seems very sensible, but the bishop attacks the black queen now, making way now for queen g3 again. But there is some potential here for knight h5. Not queen b2, because then just knight d5 is pretty dangerous, because there's a loose bishop on e7. That's attacking the queen there, so that's not a pawn to be taken here. So queen g3 looks comfortable for Magnus at this point. And there's also some threats of bishop c7, which would seem maybe worrisome to some players to not play rook a d8 or rook fd8. But it is technically possible to do this, and it is actually played here. If bishop c7, then black can just take and then take on e1, so it'll be like 2 rooks for the queen. I think this is okay. We'll do maybe a quick engine check second pass. So that's perfectly okay. Bishop c7 is not a big deal in this position. So what is black's game strategy? Well, black's game strategy is not to do with like using his 4-3 to pawn majority at the moment or anything like that. It's just to kind of intensify the pressure on the queen side and maybe lock down resources with an aggressive queen. That is a valid strategy, just to try and put white under great pressure on the queen side. White's strategy would seem, if he can develop this kingside attack, that would be ideal. But with this d-file, the exchange of rooks is so inevitable that the attacking resources are going to be diminished. We're going to be pushed into an endgame scenario rather than settling in the middle game with a king safety issue. This shared d-file, and now one pair of rooks is coming off anyway. Rook takes d8, bringing the queen back, because now, rook takes, there's bishop c7. So the queen's brought back and then quick kicked again. So queen b6. And again, here it's not so easy to go on the attack. It's just going to be leading to a horrible pin on that d-file potentially. So bishop d3 might not be the most attractive. Instead, we see bishop d4. And now the queen makes herself a nuisance. But what else? If queen d8 is virtually the only move, bishop takes f6, attacking the queen. The queen hasn't got c7. Doesn't certainly want to go to a6. That looks horrendous as well. For things like c5, maybe even worse. So the queen's only got this b3 square, but it is a nuisance here. It's tying down resources of Magnus Carlsen. But on the other hand, it's a very dangerous strategy if Magnus is calculating very carefully, which of course he's capable of doing, to gain delicate tempos from kicking this queen here. Now this rook d3 is interesting here. And this looks like another poison pawn to do with f6 and to do with the bishop here. So, or there might be, in fact, a better reason, which is something to note for the second pass, to see exactly what's happening with queen takes c4. So I'll just put a note about that. Queen takes c4. Okay. We can assume it's a poison pawn here. Queen c2 was played because black's strategy is just to tie down resources here. Now, in this position, a very interesting move indeed is played by Magnus. And it shows great calculation, this next move, which is actually b4. Clearly a long-term plan is to use the 3-2 pawn majority and maybe squeeze the bishop as well with b5 as part of that, to get that bishop going back. And also this pawn is, well, it's taken him here, but taking here is too much. Bishop takes f6 with that pin. So black plays a forcing move, knight h5 here. Okay, and there's actually at least two good moves. Queen e5 threatening the knight, it's not threatening mate, or queen e3. I think engines at certain depth prefer queen e3, but queen e5 was played. And this initiates a nice forcing sequence, very, very neat forcing sequence actually. It starts to get horrifically dangerous if the knight goes back, rook g3. Thanks very much. No, black's got this in mind. A forcing sequence here, but with g7 covered, we also need to look at the possibility here of rook a1 as well, because that does pin the bishop and threaten queen takes rook. So it's an interesting tactical moment, this, with queen e5. A very interesting tactical moment. Why did black actually have to do knight h5 is another question. It'll be interesting to check out the actual concrete threats in the second pass as well here. But with b5 on the card, it is starting to look a little bit scary for black. If the bishop has to go back, for example, to e8, because d7 there's bishop f6 potentially. So okay, knight h5, queen e5, and it initiates this forcing sequence. Bishop f6, inviting queen takes knight. Bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, queen takes c3. So here Magnus has a fantastic resource, all very accurately calculated, I'm sure, in playing queen e5, because his rook and pawn are loose, and the intention is not to try for some hack attack here with rook h4, totally decentralizing his rook and allowing, for example, h6. That's not the intention. The intention of this position is shown here: queen a5, using the back row weakness of Boris Gelfand. So attacking the rook. Rook d8 will be mating, and this secures white a positional edge and a grip on the d file. After rook f8, we see queen b6. There's a grip on this d file. B pawn, rook protected, and b5 still threatened. And these two pawns have still got the ambition for creating potentially a pass pawn. Now black's next move, e5, is a little bit controversial, because ultimately the pawn is more liable to drop off. It was seen to do so in many of the variations yesterday on the site Chessbomb, that after e5 the pawn is really weak. But if black doesn't do anything, isn't it going to be just squashed like a bug as of b5? And b7 is also under fire, and it starts to get pretty nasty indeed. So black has to do something, and by playing e5 and dislodging the rook, he's giving himself the e4 square for the bishop, for example. So rook d1, the bishop's got the e4 square to be able to answer b5s, which is the case here. b5, pardon me. Oh dear, seems to be getting another cold. I hope not too long. So b5, sorry, we see g6 and now b5, and bishop using that e4 square. But this pawn is loose. It is definitely loose, and black's made this luft, as our German friends would say in particular. So luft, German word for making f for the king with g6 there. But this pin on the pawn, I mean not pin on the pawn, this pressure on the pawn now is likely to be increased. We see now from Boris Gelfand h5 and now h4. Okay, bishop f5, which does kind of create a weakness of the last move, rook d5 now to gang up on the pawn. But what else? Because tactically, I think white's going to play something quite nasty here. In any case, he's going to make progress. I think there's a reason why black's position is sliding downhill here. White's, for example, got access to the 7th rank anyway, which is pretty dangerous. Something to check out is bishop f5 absolutely forced, because we see that the e5 pawn is much looser now. Rook d5. Okay, queen c1, pinning the bishop, and setting up. It wouldn't be wise maybe to take here because of bishop d3, but we'll see that this theme is revisited about this bishop soon. Queen takes e5. There's no bishop d3 at the moment. Bishop e6, rook d4 holding c4, rook a8, queen e2, and if Magnus is given the chance, he could double like this to be able to play rook e6. That would be potentially quite nasty. Maybe getting out of this pin first as well. Anyway, for the moment, he's just protecting c4. So king h7, and in fact rook d1, kicking the queen queen c3, queen e4, and now this plan, this long-term plan, is activated again. If white can win this pawn, actually it will be a 2-0 pawn majority. Not bad. But Boris plays rook a1. He's interested in reactivating his pin on the bishop on f1. And here is the case where, you know, human intuition has a great preference in experience for connected passed pawns. So at this point, I think Magnus is not too worried about his position, and even potentially slipping up with this bishop, maybe, because we see after rook takes a1, queen takes a1. To many of us, this pin would seem very, very dangerous. But there is this temptation. There starts to be a temptation to factor in the passed pawns. For the moment, c4 is covered, so c5 gets the pawns one step further, and queen takes b7 is on still. And now after queen c3, there's a great temptation here to make the pawns stronger, or to get rid of this pawn. And Magnus here plays queen takes b7, and you might think, well, queen takes c5, but he's got his passed pawn, okay, which he can work on. But Boris actually goes for this pin again, and in this position there isn't a way of stopping bishop c4 winning the bishop, which many of us would be in shock horror perhaps at this stage. On the other hand, we do have the two connected passed pawns, so you could say, oh dear, okay, but I've got my two connected passed pawns, don't panic. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic. The two connected passed pawns should rescue the situation here. Bishop c4 cannot be stopped, it seems. b6, anyway, bishop c4. And it so happens with h4, you know, Magnus has got an escape chute for his king as well, planned from earlier. So queen f3, okay, casually dropping a bishop, but the two passed pawns are so advanced now that there's immediate threats b7 and c6 on the cards. Boris tries queen b1, but b7, and now the pawns are rolling. They're really rolling. They're going to be connected to now after queen b5 c6, connected passed pawns. And they're unstoppable, actually. White is threatening, for example, c7. They're unstoppable. The bishop hasn't got anything to do here, apart from this move, token move, because now Magnus finishes the game elegantly with queen g3. And the front pawn is going to queen. And here, Boris Gelfand has to resign. Yeah, a very interesting game. The asset out of the opening was the 3-2 pawn majority, which was worked on during the game, actually, that asset, and triumphs ultimately in the final position. So there's a great logic underlying this game. But let's check in the second pass. Just technically, out of interest, some technically interesting moments, should we call them? So a slight advantage from the opening. Okay, we see the slight advantage for white. Okay, the first question, just to verify, you know, bishop c7 is, I don't think that's any good. Rook takes d1. And white's best is actually just to actually play knight takes here. That allows queen d4 and black's okay. And if white's intention was to take the queen, then we just take on e1, and that's fine for black. So that's one question which maybe some of you are interested in, to see why not bishop c7. So Magnus took, and now definitely, you know, if we take there's bishop c7, that's really good for white, clearly. So the queen has to take, and now we get this tempo gain again, and the queen's asking for trouble. It wants to create trouble on the queen's side. So But where else? Where else can it go? If it went to a6, it's actually apparently knight b5 painful, or b4. Either are quite painful because this threatens b5 now, and this position is just black's been driven back, or driven here on the outskirts. White in this threat will be threatening knight d5 now, discovering an attack. So that's not very pleasant, this position here. And there's also now knight e4 on the cards to intensify pressure on g7. So this is very, very pleasant for white. So basically this queen b3, which might seem odd, does have that kind of tactical reasoning behind it, possibly. So we see rook d3. So why isn't queen takes c4? That was the note. This must be a poisoned pawn in some respect. How? Okay, we just take on f6 apparently, and now rook d8 check. Oh, neat. Just winning the queen like this. It's fine and nice for white. So that's a hot pawn. So we see actually now there's actually a threat of knight d5. Surely knight d5 is a major threat on the queen and on the bishop here. So the queen gets out of the way with queen c2. And these passed pawns are starting to be worked on by Magnus. Okay, so b4, a takes, knight h5, and it's given us one of the few moves here, knight h5, to stay in the game, which is a curiosity, surely. Why is knight h5 virtually forced as a lesser evil move? Let's just say king h8. We can drive the bishop back. It goes all the way back. It can't go here because of the g7 issue. Bishop takes, threatening mate, and then we can just take on e4. So it's driven back all the way to e8. And in this position, why is it so bad? Queen c7 is quite a nuisance, attacking the bishop here. Knight d1, and what would be a threat for white? Just generally maybe queen takes b7 or knight e3 to kick the queen onto the outskirts, the A road. Okay, so this is just basically an unpleasant position here now, which has emerged in this sort of position. So black has to be careful, and knight h5 is one of those, I think, lesser evil moves in a difficult position, which still gives white something, and the engine likes either queen e5 or e3. Where else actually? If queen h3, then we've got splat knight f4, haven't we? That could be at least good for black. We can't do that. So there aren't too many squares for the queen here. In fact, even stronger. Well, doesn't really matter. Rook a1 is also strong. So queen e5. Now here there is I think a question about rook a1 potentially threatening. If black's given a chance, queen takes d3. Now I think both players saw this possibility. Knight d1 attacks the rook and shields against queen d3. That bishop not pinned. Rook takes, and this really impressed me in the press conference. There's a long line here which both players see. Check after the forcing sequence of several moves. Even here, so they all see this move h6, not g6 or any other move. You might wonder, aren't there any other alternatives? No, the king's got to escape because of queen takes f8. If g6, queen f8 is mate, so the king's given an escape square. Okay, and they see the whole forcing sequence, which, okay, the branching factor is low, so maybe that's not entirely magical, but it's this final move in the positional evaluation accompanying it. Queen d6, and Magnus says, and bishop apparently should be better. Of course, he's still got his 2-to-1 pawn majority, but it's this position here that Magnus has seen, all from rook a1, with the evaluation accompanying it. This lovely mix of seeing all the forcing stuff and a beautiful, detailed evaluation at the end, compensating, for our human lack of calculating ability. We can just evaluate this position here as very favourable. White is the bishop pair, b5's coming. It's all pretty great. So this is all from rook a1. All this was calculated from rook a1. But black goes in for this other way. So bishop f6. So we see the two candidates here. But bishop f6 is arguably, again, probably the lesser evil move for black. When I say lesser evil move, if you're worse, you just sometimes have to pick lesser evil moves to try and stay on the board as long as possible and present the opponent as many problems as possible. So queen takes h5. This other forcing sequence here with queen a5, precisely calculated as well, and leading again to an evaluation favourable for white. A grip on the d file, 2-1 pawn majority. b5 is on the cards. Black virtually forced to play e5 because he doesn't want his bishop on e8 here. If we go, let's say g6, b5. In fact, e5 here tactically doesn't even work. Rook d3. Okay, pinning the pawn. Well, the bishop is ending up going to e8. It's just unpleasant, and e5 dropping here anyway. So black is worse. Clearly, black is worse in this position. In this sort of position. So with b5 as an ominous threat, e5, trying to get this e4 square for the bishop. Rook d1. We've still got the trump cards basically from the opening. It probably didn't seem so decisive from the opening that a move like CD and is such a big deal, but it's something for white to work on and nurture his passed pawns here on the queen side. So we see g6, b5, bishop e4. G6 is a very sensible decision to give the king left, but hold on a sec, hold on. If h6, that's an alternative, you might think, without giving up the f6 square. Oh, pardon me. In this position, why can't black, you ask, just play h6? Actually, the engine doesn't mind h6 as much as g6. I think g6 didn't actually help black's position much, giving white potential f6 square. I think h6 looks intuitively a little bit more solid, actually. Same idea for giving the bishop e4. So I think this made Magnus's job a lot easier by this kind of g6 instead of h6. I think that, yes, that's definitely worth noting, I think. So the job was made easier, g6. So look at Magnus's advantage. Not yet a pawn up, but still like nearly 1+1. What is white actually threatening here? Threatening rook d7, h4, and rook d7 is also it's pretty worrisome stuff for black. Okay, the rook would be tied down to f7. Okay, so we see h5 and h4, which was very useful later. Black's not doing anything. This rook's really tied down. If the rook tries to come round, there's no time, is there? Because of rook d7. The rook has to go back, has to stumble back. So the rook's tied down. We see bishop f5, stopping rook d7. I mean, that's to prevent rook d7, ideally. Okay, but the e pawn's dropping off. So it is still a downward path with this e pawn being an issue now. So white's now officially a pawn up. Okay, and now protecting his c pawn, but black's for the moment got some active play now. At least he's sorted out f7. The rook isn't tied to f7. Okay, so this active play needs to be handled. So we see queen e2 with the idea of rook d1. Potentially, but now let's say rook a1 is played. Check. Okay, and what's going on here? Queen e5. It doesn't matter about the bishop being lost here. Check. And this is a variation which was mentioned in the press conference. Black's getting mated. So again, precise calculation, and again showing another reason why g6 made Magnus's life and conversion a lot easier. That really was a very helpful blunder, this g6, weakening these dark squares around the king. That in this position here, rook a1 is no big deal at all. Beautiful stuff behind the scenes here. So rook a1, just rook d8 is killing here. If king g7, check, we can take here, and it's black's king, which is worse than white's king. Even if the king comes to g3, we can play f3 here, and that's it. Black's king's had it. Okay, so this shows that the job has been made a lot easier actually. This g6. So we see king h7. Now being able to evict the queen is best. Sorry about this nonsense I mentioned earlier. Rook e4 I think is a hopeless move and very dangerous to play. You can't allow this rook a1 here. This is no good. So I don't know what got into me there. But so no, in this position, evict the queen. Rook a1 is potentially quite serious, and it's been set up with king h7 without getting mated. So evict the queen. Okay, and this bishop still is a potential tactical issue, but not until white gets his passed pawns going, then it's not really an issue. Even losing a whole bishop, it's not an issue. If black, this is a miserable loss fundamentally. Just b6 here, and black's just going to lose quite soon. So winning the bishop by force, queen e1. Yeah, Magnus may have missed this, but so what? In fact, there is a way of stopping bishop c4. We can play queen e7 here, just pinning. That is a way, and that is actually one of the stronger moves here. Technically, queen e7. Pardon me, I didn't see that at all. The lovely Houdini finds these moves to stop bishop c4. It was possible. So queen f3, not really minding. Sorry, no. In this position, after queen e1. Magnus just played b6 actually, so he doesn't mind at all bishop c4. Then he brings the queen back, and his passed pawns outweigh the bishop. Black's queen's actually getting slightly misplaced here. If he tries, well, this is equally hopeless surely. In fact, queen takes f7. I think just king h2 wins here. These pieces are misplaced and these passed pawns are just winning here. Does white have to be careful? If he plays g3, queen e4, he has to be careful not to give black mating threats. So king g1 here, queen e1, queen f4. Even in this position, again, now white's in the driving seat with the pawns without any problem. Pawns are just driven forward. So this is in the variation with with bishop takes f1. So bishop takes f1, letting white take on f7 as an alternative to queen takes f1. Let's just review that again. So taking king h2, and now king h1, king g1, not g3. So king g1. Kind of gaining a valuable tempo, not minding any discovered check, putting the queen away from the light squares for any discovered check, and this is still absolutely winning for white. These passed pawns are just winning here. So okay, so in the game we saw queen takes f1, and the pawns are just steaming forward. steamrolling forward. Okay, nice finish. Great game from Magnus. Magnus wasn't too impressed by the other games this round. As we're about to see, but let's have a look at the other games in this round. Well, not counting this one really. Rajabov against Vidler. Okay. Rajabov went in for well, they both played for this Grunfeld, which Vidler had great results for in qualifying for this tournament. I think the World Cup is so Zvidler's the greatest, one of the greatest exponents of the Grunfeld defence, and we see here this looks all theoretical, and okay, it's all pretty much, it looks entirely theoretical, this game. Bishop going back there, and I know this isn't spectator value here, but we see this repetition kind of thing against the queen. I know it's the damp squid of the round. I hope there's no secret treasures buried in this game that I'm going to find out later. this vista of millions of amazing tactical resources which are completely instructive. No, I hope this was just a drawn game, but just to be on the absolutely safe side, just in case any missed opportunity. Let's just give it a whiz with the engine check to see. I'm just going to make sure there's no outright howlers here. Any weaknesses of the last move that black played, any golden opportunity missed here. Like in the round 7 draw game, I felt quite bad for days after. Well, when I found out there was something big here. Now bishop g4. Hold on a sec. There is a weakness to the last move of bishop g4. The engine did flick up. Rook takes b7 here. So why can't we just take this pawn? Let's just take this pawn. Black just equalises surely with bishop takes d4. If bishop h6, attacking the bishop. We don't play this, I guess. That's terrible because we can take here. Check. And this actually looks like a very good advantage for white after e5. But okay, so there is a kind of weakness to the last move here, possibility. But we take here on b7. Black takes on d4. We play bishop h6. Black has rook d8 here, just rook d8, and there's a threat now. Bishop takes f2, surely to win the queen. So this should be okay for black at this depth anyway. So okay, hopefully no big surprise of a massive blunder there. So knight c6, d5, knight a5, rook e1, b6, knight d4. Bishop went back instead of taking, which apparently is a little bit like this depth. Taking on e2 is also seems reasonable, but this allows a repetition draw clearly with rook a1. Where else can the queen actually go? Queen can't go anywhere. It's not good spectator value, is it? If this is the case, why can't the queen go to a3 here as an alternative? Try and carry on. Why not Peter Zvedler play queen a3? Well, it seems actually there's bishop a6 or something that would control the c file. Queen d2. This I don't know. Bishop a6. Maybe just you fancy the draw with black. The queen can go back and they can continue from this position, but I don't know. But why should the onus be on black to avoid the repetition draw? White can play other moves in this position. White can immediately play bishop a6 if he doesn't want a repetition draw, surely. So Rajabov, maybe he's a bit fed up with things with some of his games in this tournament, I don't know. So maybe they're just both satisfied with a draw here. So I'm hoping, yeah, there's no other major treasures buried in this game, so please excuse the light commentary as we go on to the next game. I'll stop that. Okay. Grischuk against Kramnik. Now this has been a talking point of the round. This game. Oh dear. So let's see why. After e4, Vladimir plays his perfect drawing system against e4 called the Berlin Wall, which he's mastered and was used to grind down Kasparov in one of the most boring World Championship games ever held in London under the auspices of Brain Games, which I actually went to watch one or two. The Brain Game match, which saw the popularity of the Berlin defence go up through the roof, and I am called Cox, C-O-X, even wrote a book on the Berlin, and oh dear, what a dull opening, but a great drawing system with black. So trying to get the queens off, and queenless positions are quite liked by Vladimir. One could argue he's one of the leading exponents of queenless middle game positions. So it suits him down to the ground, this sort of position. It's difficult to crack this nut here, this Berlin, and it might also explain the rise in Catalan type systems, just to avoid this Berlin system, because it does seem to be a way of black just playing comfortably for equality. So a4, a5, and I think I'm going to do a naughty trick here called fast forward. This is a naughty trick, but it means I can spend more time talking about the interesting juicy bits, as I call them, of chess games, which actually my brother found it amusing to talk about juicy bits in games, because he doesn't find chess that exciting. So let's go to the juicy bit. Okay, we're going to fast forward here to an interesting moment of this game. Okay, we're going to get to the juicy bit, and the juicy bit here, after quite a few exchanges, King f2, Bishop f5 from Vladimir, Knight takes f5, Knight takes f5. Now why am I drawing your attention to this juicy bit? Okay, we see the move g4. Now I guess normal grandmasters are calculating stuff like b3 is slightly loose, you know, g4, knight d4 might attack b3. Now most normal chess players over FIDE 2000 do have this ability to evaluate positions. It's not just like bean counting as recommended in the classic unwarranted book Think Like a Grandmaster. Now if you're not just bean counting chess, this next move, bishop takes d4, violates at least 3 different things all at the same time. First of all, 1, it's undoubling black's pawns. Second of all, this is known as a protected passed pawn. Third, dynamic point, d3 can be played at any time to distract the king here. Another point is actually this pawn is actually restricting potentially these 2 pawns. So this is why bishop takes d4 can be ruled out of principle. Not only that, sorry, just one more point. This b3 pawn in the light of the double pawns is not such a big deal. It's not such a big deal. So white could really look at offering b3 for other dynamic aspects of the position. Black's pawn majority is not all of a sudden pronounced with the absence of that pawn. Okay, so there's a few fundamental evaluation points about this move, bishop takes d4 in this position. Nevertheless, it was played by Grischuk. Okay, so c takes d4, and we see this game continuation. King e2, king d7, king d3, c5. We've got this protected passed pawn, and funny enough, this position here is completely lost for white, because funny enough, d3 is also an important distraction resource. No, it's more complicated than this. There's other variations behind the scenes, sure, but let's look at the main game. So f4, this is taken. d3, distracting the king back. King goes back. King takes e5. King takes d3. King f4. And this is just a completely lost king and pawn ending, actually. Here, it's completely lost. And here, white resigned. Okay, now let's go back to the interesting moments and put it under scrutiny. So I'm fast forwarding, I know it's naughty, but we just want to look at the interesting moments. So knight takes f5, g4. Okay, knight d4. What were the options available to white in this position? There is a dynamic option outlined in the press conference. You give up the pawn here, and there's a subtle resource in this position which is much better than charging up with the king. And it is possible, I mean, it is possible that Alexander just didn't see this continuation at all. Because, for example, you could go for a selfmate. You could play king e4, and I think there's an interesting selfmate here with king d7, and, for example, you know, mate, if you want. That shows some of the dangers of the position. You can't just charge up with your king to d5. But there is a powerful resource here in this position, e6, which actually, yeah, very important to calculate this forcing kind of move. It activates the bishop along the diagonal, which potentially targets these two pawns. So let's see, if this is taken, bishop g7, and the bishop's alive. John e5 is alive, the bishop is alive. Okay, so c6, we can take this. King e7, we can take this. And we've got passed pawns as well. Lo and behold. Evaluation in chess is wonderful, isn't it? We've got a passed pawn here at the end of this forcing sequence. We don't even have to calculate. We know we've got some prospects here. Can black play b5? Is that the case? Hold on a sec. Okay, after the king moves, h4. Does it matter about b5? No, we can just go with our, I think, passed pawn here in this kind of scenario. Because actually queen d8 is threatened with mate. Quite amusingly in this variation, actually, queen d8 is mate. Okay, so all right, so it's a critical moment. It's a critical moment. Knight d4. Bishop takes d4 is just actually okay. Let's check out some variations here, like f4, which adds some complexity to the situation. White wants to create a passed pawn, doesn't he? So sacrificing a pawn temporarily for h4 and g5 would seem dangerous. So we take. How do we go about this? King f3. Unfortunately, again, there's a distraction here. Well, d3 is a pain. The king can't step to stop this pawn. He can't go here. Can't stop the pawn. We can't take here. This pawn's queening. So d3 here, and what do? It's lost. This position's lost. f4 is not working. f4 is not working. So this pawn holding both these pawns is quite a critical feature of this position. So we see king e2. It's virtually the only move. So we get this protected. We've got this protected passed pawn here. So okay. So king e4. We see king e6. And this is just lost. This king and pawn ending. Look at this evaluation. It's absolutely lost because of this distraction. It gives black. I mean, if white goes back here, we just lose that pawn, and black's got the f4 square. So there aren't too many possibilities. f4, take d3. The king's driven back. Losing that pawn for the d3 one, but black's got a really aggressive king now. It's completely lost. Vasily Ivanchuk playing back against Levon Aronian played knight f6. So Levon Aronian had suffered a defeat in an early round, obviously against Boris Gelfand. So was he able to recover from his defeat? Well, after c4, we see a very surprise opening, e5. The Budapest Gambit. It is a very interesting system. I think especially dangerous in blitz, and one which maybe blitz players like myself should experiment more with. and now it's being used in such a high level game by Vasily Ivanchuk. Okay, so what's actually wrong with Black's position though? Black's position at the opening is not so bad here at the moment. Bishop f4, it's not bad at all. This is all standard theory. White's getting these double pawns, and Black is now playing for this f6, and he's getting active piece play, and he's potentially getting some dynamism on the f file. I think White is playing in a way to guarantee a small edge. So we see d6. Okay, White has a small edge. g3, bishop g2, bishop g4. In this game, Vasily starts using a lot of time though. His time management hasn't been particularly amazing in this tournament, and actually, objectively, this opening position seems absolutely fine. White's extra pawn is kind of academic here in some respects. Doubled, blockadable maybe potentially on c5. Black's got nice pressure, it can play for knight e5 to neutralise against knight d4. If he has a pawn on e5, he's stopping knight d4. So this actually, okay, so knight e5 can kick away the knight. So knight f5. White's still got a certain plus. Doesn't matter about walking in. There's no amazing discovery on the queen here. So White's got a comfortable position though, but you know, Black's position isn't terrible. There's this nice natural blockade square, one of Nimzovich's favourite places for blockading with the knight is in front of doubled pawns. So, but actually knight b6 is trying to target maybe c4 instead. Okay, but this is used for dynamic play now. c4 is given up here for dynamic play against Vasily's king with the move queen h4. It introduces this bishop e4 resource against h7. There's also possibilities of doubling rooks and rook d7 at various points. So g6, bishop e4, threatening bishop g6, and we need to engine check this position. It's become a little bit tactical. What's going on here after queen takes c4? It's going to add a quick note after that. Okay, so king g7 is played, and we see king g2, the pawn is taken, rook fd1. So White's got this stranglehold on the d file, with the idea of rook d7 being pretty absolutely dangerous as well. Ivanchuk now takes on a2, and we see g4, which makes way for potentially g5, queen h6, and also rook h3 as new resources in the position. But it does weaken the f4 square, which is pounced with rook f4, and the bishop is very nicely handled here. In fact, let's have a guess the move. What do you think Levon Aronian plays in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, he plays bishop f5. Great move. Bishop f3 looks as though it just runs into e4. So there's, if takes, we've got queen g5 check, and rook d7 looks menacing, or rook d7 looks absolutely menacing. We'll check the specifics in a little bit. Ivanchuk very short on time. Knight d5 is played, rook h3, but he's also got a very bad position here now after rook h8, e3. The queen's protecting f2. There's no cheapos here or here at the moment. And in fact, after g takes, e takes, this is actually winning for White in any case, but I think Ivanchuk lost on time as well at move 30. So e takes f4. This position is actually winning for White on the board here. Okay, so 1-0. So knight takes f4, for example. Okay, engine's still there. Okay, and if knight takes, black just gets mated. There's no queen g5 here. Rook d7 check. Black would have to give up the queen because otherwise he's getting mated just with like this, for example. Okay, so this is actually looks like a lost position. This position here. It's absolutely gone. This position. Let's go back earlier and see if there are any opportunities which really should be noted. So, an interesting choice of opening, and one hardly ever seen at Super Grandmaster level. This might be the first game ever with the Budapest Gambit. So, Rook AE8, Rook AE1. So White's got a nagging edge. Prepared to give up his bishop here. If Queen takes E5, I think we can just take on B7. Okay, that should be okay for White. That's better for White. So Black gets this extra pawn island here. 1 pawn island, 2, 3. So White's still got a small edge. Okay. And you might think, well, it's a pawn up as well, but it's just academic, the double pawns. It's only a small edge, actually. So Queen E4, which was attacking the pawn. So C6 parrying B7 now. We see Rook D1. Okay, here, just a quick question about Knight C5. Let's just wonder about this. Just Queen E3. Maybe the blockade isn't that brilliant. What would White's plan here be? Bishop E4, Bishop F3, and if E4 is that Bishop H5, creating some weaknesses, and then going back to G4. That's interesting. Okay, there'd still be a game here. This looks like a nice blockade, actually. This position, intuitively, this looks like a reasonable play to play Knight C5. But Knight B6 and Rook F7, the engine moves at this depth. Rook F7, Knight B6. Okay, because it's got this willingness, well, wanting to get material back, Knight B6, compared to just wanting to blockade the position. So if there's nothing so bad about Knight C5, I think the evaluation just goes up a little bit for White. But if it's remaining constant, maybe this could be enough for a draw potentially. But anyway, we see Knight B6, so it's more committal in some respects, giving White dynamic opportunity to potentially sacrifice this C pawn, which is what we saw. So Queen H4. Okay, so what is actually going on here? If Queen takes C4 in this position, Queen takes C4, Knight takes Rook D7, so we're on B7. And this is okay for White. White's got some pressure, but it's no big deal, surely. This position is not such a big deal. So I think actually it was time pressure related, what we see later. Maybe so we see Queen H4, G6. Another possibility, Bishop E4, just to explore this. G6 here is okay. That pin's okay to have. So in the game we see this, King G7, King G2, another pawn's taken, Rook FD1, and look, the evaluation's even at this depth it's okay, but there's some lurking dangers here. Black taking on A2, was that a bit of a hot pawn? Queen takes A2, was that needed? Does safety move Rook F7 against the 7th rank is interesting. What would White do here? Is it so clear? This bishop is pinned to the queen. Is it entirely clear? With the bishop taking this pawn, we're kind of unpinning. We're taking the pressure off White, giving white a freer hand, surely. So queen takes a2. White's now got this g4, introducing attacking resources into the position. And if queen c4 now, in the game we saw rook f4, but g5 is now possible, so we've got this new resource queen h6, if nothing else, protecting the bishop. So king h8. But again, even here, what's the big deal? What's the big deal about the attack? White might be threatening bishop takes g6, I guess. Okay, there's rook d6. Bishop g6, black can just take off the queens and say, so what? So what? Black's even slightly better there. So, yeah, I think this is time pressure related. This looks to be absolutely time pressure related. Now, even here, after rook f4, in the game continuation, bishop f5, is there anything actually that concrete for white? What is white actually threatening? Rook d7 is the major threat to get to h7. Black has knight, so he played knight d5. Fine. White played rook h3. Fine. In this position, Vasily played rook h8. So, is that the howler? That starts to give white a big advantage. That looks like a howler here. So if black plays h5 instead, is there any way to break black's position? It looks equal at depth 16, so e3, queen g5, nothing works, no? Queen g5 threatening g6, we take on g4 check here. Bishop takes, we sacrifice the exchange basically, and it looks for a moment quite dangerous, but yeah. If we take this pawn, check, and black wins back the exchange immediately. So this might actually be okay for black, this position. So that's an interesting defensive resource. Maybe Vasily just didn't have enough time. Otherwise h5 seems like a valid defensive resource. This is a pretty slow computer, but at depth 17 we can say that seems okay with h5. So rook h8 didn't help black's position at all. It hurt black's position because of e3. Actually, let's make a note even on this position. I just want to make a special note here that black after e3 is given an interesting resource, which the engine is recommending, of sacking the rook here. Rook takes f2 check is much better, much stronger than the game continuation, a lesser evil move for sure, it seems, after taking here to take now. So although black is the exchange down here, it's not as bad as the game continuation, but I think Levon indicated this is quite miserable for black to play here. So why exactly? Well, let's go with a5, c4, chasing the knight away from d5. Check. Black is the exchange down for just a pawn. If he tries to get the pawns going, it shouldn't be enough for the exchange down basically, but there's still a bit of a fight. Okay, so it was made much easier by this non-lesser evil move, not playing rook takes f2, but instead this move g takes f5. Okay. And the strongest is e takes f4 by a little bit apparently. Queen g5 is also strong for e takes f4 after, but e takes f4 immediately. And this is I mean, this is where I think the time forfeit anyway. No, in this position after rook h3, it seems h5 looks like the best defense. If we go with queen takes e2, what does white have here? Currently not taking on h7. it's not a clear attack, but actually in this position, after queen takes e2, we have rook takes d5. And if, for example, here now, with mate, this position, something like this, the king's getting driven around the place. Anyway, veering off here. So, out of all the defences here, h5 seems the most, the best. Easy with engines, of course, to find all this stuff. So h5 here, with the idea of sacking the exchange and not minding a check on h7. White's pieces are misplaced, and the knight seems quite nice in the centre at the moment, so this is tricky. So we've seen queen g5. If e3, trying a different method, g takes. And again, it seems as though there might not be such a big deal about White's attack. You know, if e takes, then we can just do various moves here. Even f takes g4. We don't have to win back the exchange. And it's not such a big deal. Okay, so an interesting game, but marred by time pressure. And it means, you know, the chasers of Magnus Carlsen, one of them seems to have been gifted a point, in Kramnik's own words, being gifted, and he doesn't usually receive gifts like that. It happens to other players. And Levon Aronian's been, well, it's slightly different. It wasn't the fault of the opening, in my view, in my opinion. It wasn't at all the fault of the opening. It was time management, which has been a recurring pattern, unfortunately, for Vasily Ivanchuk's tournament. So even towards the end position, there was a key defensive resource available, but you need time to find these resources. Okay, I hope you enjoyed coverage of this round. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.